Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to the Catholic Mama, where you'll learn how to deepen and defend your faith, find comfort as we share the vocation of parenthood, and learn how to raise your children confidently Catholic. I'm your host, Christine Mooney Flynn. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Catholic Mama. I'm your host, Christine Mooney Flynn, and welcome. Whether you are listening in the morning, the afternoon, evening, or middle of the night, thank you for joining us. And I say us because it's not just me today. I've got two guests. One is a regular. You may recognize his voice once again because I can't get rid of him. My wonderful husband, Pat Flynn.
Well, you didn't introduce me as the back by popular demand.
Sorry,
so
your eminence.
Your eminence. Yeah, I'll take it. We did try. I do want to say that we did try and do this episode last night. I was wrapped up in a blanket watching Infinity War when my wife was like, "Hey, do you want to come talk about how wicked of an age we live in?" I'm like, I sprung up like a rocket. You bet I do. And so the baby woke up and we didn't get to finish that episode. But I'm here and we have another guest too, which I'll let we're sharing two mics, so be patient for any interruptions. We don't want to like blur the lines here, but we have another special guest with us, don't we?
Yeah, so this is actually fun because last night we would have done this just the two of us, and you being half asleep. But now we're in Wisconsin visiting family and friends. We've got a good friend, Pete. Why don't you go ahead and say hello and introduce yourself?
Hi, Catholic Mama. My name's Pete Groehler. I'm a Christian apologist, host of the Right Side of Things podcast, coming at you soon. Still getting the logistics together, and it's great to be here with my friends Christine and Pat.
Yeah, so Pete, who I typically introduce as the Mighty and Magnificent on my Catholic radio show, so he's been a guest on my show a number of times, and we've talked about pretty much everything at this point. But Pete and I actually go way back, and like to the 8th grade back, and it's interesting. You know, we just did an episode on my show about this where we talked about how I wouldn't have even considered myself religious at that time, and I got very far away from the faith, and then I had my reconversion experience. Pete had kind of a re-authentication experience or a self-authentication experience that happened to him later in life that was interesting. But anyways, we can background stories, always so boring. Why don't we get into the meat of this episode? You're the host of the show. Don't let me hijack this.
As I'm pulling the microphone away. So Pat and I have taken, and I just said this actually on a podcast that I recorded earlier. We have now driven over 5,000 miles over the past few months, and it's a lot. And we have our kids in the car in the St. Bernard, but as messy and smelly and loud as the van can be during these trips, it's actually given us a lot of time to chit chat. And one of those things on the last trip out to Wisconsin we were thinking about was, my dad's a firm believer that every generation thinks it's the worst generation. It doesn't matter if it was in the 1940s or the 1860s or back in the plague time. Everybody thinks they had it the worst. But in light of, and I would have agreed with him for a long time, but now in light of me understanding exactly how terrible abortion is and how horrible our problem is with medications for depression or the increase in psychological problems or mental illness, is this the most wicked age? And we started chit-chatting a little bit about this in the van on our long ride. But we didn't really get into it. We thought it would be a fun podcast to talk about.
Yeah, and I think there's certain arguments that need to be made, and I do think that there are arguments that there were ages that were comparably bad, perhaps worse in some regards. I mean, obviously things like the Holocaust stick out, which always it fascinates me when we have like these weirdly like pro-Enlightenment people, like ever since the Enlightenment, everything has been great. Yeah, okay, the quote unquote nice Enlightenment, let's just ignore the greatest atrocities that ever occurred to humankind in that period. The nice Enlightenment. Yes, I agree. Not the communist Enlightenment, the eradication of 30 million people or any of those things. The nice Enlightenment. You know what I'm talking about, Pete.
The
Wink,
nice
wink, hint, hint.
Indeed.
So, like you can think of things like the Holocaust, but okay, well, that is going on now. And I'm not entirely convinced that Germany isn't fundamentally the worst country to ever exist on earth. I'm open to evidence for that. I do have Beethoven and Bach and some other things, but Germany has produced some really bad people and some really bad events. But just sticking, within our own culture and time, I think we are starting to reap a lot of what was sown in the Enlightenment period after the kind of shattering of the Christian religion into its various, many, almost countless denominations, the loss of natural law theory as a kind of stabilizing force in the culture that kind of bound us all together. Maybe people had different political views here and there, but they all kind of fundamentally agreed morally on a lot of the same things. And we're seeing this kind of disgusting dive into moral relativism, where people, think that relatives can just kind of be chosen, morals can be chosen at a whim or whatever's convenient for the time, or that morals don't even exist at all, which is something I constantly battle against on my own show and in personal conversations and in certain classrooms. And I think it's really important fundamentally is that something is wrong objectively. It doesn't matter how many people think it's right. Like, something is wrong. And you brought up the thing of abortion. Obviously, people who don't see any problem with abortion aren't going to see this as a wicked age, just as people who didn't see anything wrong with child immolation or slavery saw their age as a wicked age. But it doesn't mean that it wasn't a wicked age, right? So there's a lot to unpack here, but I think there's a strong argument to say, like, if it's not the most wicked age, it certainly is a wicked age. So I would just open with that little monologue.
Well, thank you. So we have a lot of topics that could come to proving that this is if not the most wicked age. Is there any one that I'm open. I'm open to talking about whichever one anybody wants to talk about first.
Pete, why don't you throw something out there, man? What's striking you right now?
For me, especially, it's the idea of identity politics and intersectionality coming to the forefront. And I think that, and I always
Here we go, Catholic mama.
And I always talk too about the pendulum always swings back, so to speak. And we are seeing, especially in today, being told that a lot of things are for our own good, so to speak. The government teaching our children about sexuality younger and younger, and the taking away gender from biological sex. And I think we're just, like you said, all of these things are branching from moral relativism in that there are no objective truths. And I think that's really gotten us in a quagmire. And some would argue that the college campuses especially are kind of breeding grounds for this new type of ideology. And I think Lincoln said it best when he said, the philosophy of the classroom in one generation is the philosophy of government in the next. And That's got me scared.
I think one of the greatest tricks that the devil ever played is to get you to do wrong by thinking you're doing right. And that, to me, pretty much summarizes a lot of this ideology that's going on. So let me just say, before I get into the whole identity politics and identifying as a pineapple pizza or a piano or whatever people are into today, that I'm probably at once going to forfeit any future career in Hollywood from what I'm about to say. So if you're a casting agent or some type of talent scout, please just hold off on the rest of this episode momentarily.
Well, you're not really that good looking anyway.
Oh, come on.
He's got a face for radio.
That's it. I quit. It all, to me, goes right back to natural law, folks, right? Like, either things are designed for a reason. All right, God made us for a reason. We're put here for a reason. We have identity as being made in the image and likeness of God. He knew what he was doing when he created us. He knew the kinds of people we wanted to be, or he didn't, right? Or there is no God. There is no teleology in nature. There is no directedness, no aimness. But then that means that it's not moral relativism. This is the confusion. It's moral nihilism, folks, right? Like, you don't just get to pick whatever morals are convenient at the time. It's either something is truly right or wrong, independent of any human opinion of it, right? This is moral realism, objective moral values and duties. That's what I think. This is what we all intuit anyways. This is a properly basic belief. I would also say that it's the right belief, or it's false, right? There is no objective morality. There's no way to ground it. If God does not exist, you're stuck with naturalism and evolution. The best we could say of morality is that it was evolved in the sense that we invented it. It was helpful for survival, but there is no right or wrong. There is no good or evil. So when it comes to condemning people for not accepting your identity as a pineapple pizza or whatever the heck you want to say you are, you have no moral grounds to argue against that person.
Yep.
If you're saying there's no teleology or right or wrong to begin with on a postmodern worldview. So you can identify as a lamp or a chair or a rhinoceros or a boy or a girl or whatever the heck you want. That's fine. People invent fantasies all the time. It doesn't mean that it's actually true. Or if it were true on your kind of relativistic worldview, you have absolutely no position from which to condemn anybody that's condemning you on moral grounds. So the whole argument for morality in that world was completely and utterly incoherent. And it's a shame that people were falling for it, because as Christians, we do want to be caring and loving of other people, but at the same time, we have an obligation to promote what is true. And what is true is that there are men and there are women and there are people that are confused. But just because you're confused doesn't mean you're not a man or a woman. We have to figure this out. We have to get this straight, because this ideology is extremely dangerous on many fronts, and we already see where it's leading. And a number of years ago, I would have never believed that we would have been here now. And there's certain things that I would have gone along with that I would go along with now that have brought us to this, but. A wicked age is certainly right, and it seems that my Hollywood career has come to an end before it's even started. But you know what? Some things just need to be said.
There's always voiceover acting.
In the episode of the podcast that I recorded earlier, it was about the dangers of being spiritual but not religious, and that's so many of at least our generation today. That if you look at the silent generation, which would have been right after the World War II people, 80-90% of them believed that God was real and was very much a presence in their life. And now in millennials, you're down to 50-60% or less. Mm-hmm. But we feel like we can, we've got it under control ourselves. We're part of God's in us, the life force, all that stuff. So we can decide what's right or wrong. But that can shift depending on what's convenient. Yeah.
And I want to be clear, is like a lot of these agnostic millennials are not atheists, right? They become spiritual but not religious, and they subscribe to this life force or whatever people in California are into. And, it's a very convenient ideology. They say they're spiritual but not religious without realizing that that's just the religion, right? It's being spiritual but not religious. You can't escape religion, whatever your ultimate commitment it is. It happens to be a very convenient religion because, you can kind of tap into that divine sense whenever you feel you need the comfort of it. But then whenever you feel like being a little mischievous or whatever, that's all right. It's the life force, won't judge me. And I can see why that's tempting, and certainly
and then if you hurt anybody along the way, well, they're just not as spiritually attuned as you are. They're
right. They're just not woke.
Right.
That's correct, right? It's the Manichaeanism philosophy, the old Star Wars thing, which St. Augustine used to be, right? Where it says, there's no real good or evil, right? It's just kind of like a balancing force.
It's a spectrum.
The light of dark side. And what converted Augustine was realizing, actually, this isn't true. Good and evil are not on the same metaphysical playing field, right? When you really understand these conceptually, you realize that evil is always parasitic on good. You can't even imagine evil existing by itself. Like, what the hell does pure evil look like? Like even Darth Vader or the devil is good in some sense that they exist. Like it is better to exist than not to exist. That is a good thing to exist, even if they are under certain privations or distortions or perversions. There is still inherent goodness there. Evil is a privation of the good. It's a parasitic relationship. Understanding this, you realize, oh shoot, there are objective goods, and evil actually is evil. And that's what converted Augustine out of Manichaeanism and actually brought him to Christianity, was that understanding that the whole Star Wars philosophy, this whole life force stuff, is a bunch of nonsense.
I'm going to say, as far as in visualizing what pure evil would look like in a book sense, I think Madeleine L'Engle did a really good job in A Wrinkle in Time, because she has this point where the kids in the book have to go and confront this darkness that makes them so uncomfortable. And she does such a good job. And this was written, decades ago, of making you just feel so icky. It's so icky. There is a difference between good and evil. You can't just decide for yourself what's convenient. One sense is good. The next time, that's a little too hard for me.
And look, we all know it. If anybody of these life force people really didn't think there was any difference between good or evil, well, they're sure not acting like it, right? They might justify bad behavior that makes them feel guilty because deep down they know that they did something wrong by saying, oh, there's really no bad. But like, again, like nobody out there honestly and truly thinks that that it is morally indifferent to either save a drowning child from a pool or push a kid into a pool and cause them to drown. Nobody's
healthy. I mean, there are people. They're psychopaths.
Oh, sure, yes. The moral sense is not infallible, right? So when we say that there's an objective morality, and I'm afraid I might have to get a little bit technical here to drive the point, but as we know, the Catholic Mama is a highly intelligent audience, so this won't be a problem. When we say that there's an objective morality, we mean that some things are truly right and wrong, independent of any human opinion of it. Now, we all have this moral sense. We all have this sense that some things are truly right and wrong. And to affirm the sense, we only need to think of one act that just so repulses us, and we can all think of that. Maybe you go to the cliches like the Holocaust or child abuse or rape or something like that. But we know like that's wrong. And even if somebody thought that was right, it would still be wrong. And if somebody thought that was right, we'd say they have a serious moral problem, that something about their moral sense is impaired, like something about somebody who's blind has an impairment of eyesight. So the moral sense is within all of us. It occasions this properly basic belief that some things are truly right and other things are wrong. But that moral sense is, of course, susceptible to perversion and distortion and fallibility, just like any other sense. And when people suffer severe distortions to moral sense, we have terms for that. They are morally unhealthy. They are a sociopath, and so on or so forth. Just like we have terms for people who lack eyesight. They are visually impaired. They are blind, because we all know that some things are truly good and other things are wrong. And there's just no getting around this. And there is, of course, a religion that affirms this. That religion is Christianity, but you can't get it with some type of vague spirituality. You can't even get it really in Buddhism. Buddhism is a series of contradictions ultimately about this type of stuff anyways. We can get into that if we feel that it's necessary, but I think we'll probably get a little bit off topic. But the point is like this idea of the Star Wars philosophy of life force, of Manichaeanism. This has been around forever, right? This is not new stuff. Right. The people in the church converted to Christianity because they realized on a philosophical and metaphysical level that it just didn't make sense. It just didn't hold up. Some things are good, other things are evil. There is a difference between right and wrong. These things actually exist, which means there must be a standard of goodness in the world. That standard, of course, would be God.
Wow. You're a fast talker.
Thank you. I've had a few sips of wine.
My goodness.
In vino veritas.
Now, but let's think of the implications of this and why a lot of people don't want to ascribe to this, because it does, a lot of people, why they like this kind of vague spirituality or whatever is because they feel that and this is always a funny thing, because people are like, oh, you just believe in God because you want God to be true. Well, the sword cuts both ways. Well, you don't believe in God, or you believe in this vague spirituality because you want that to be true. You think that some type of objective moral law somehow impedes upon your freedom or your autonomy. And people readily admit to this all the time. So any type of Freudian analysis of or looking at somebody's psychological state for why they believe in something is certainly not enough of an argument to disprove something, because it works both ways. Either something we have good arguments and reasons to suppose that the existence of good and evil actually are really there and that God exists, or that it's some vague, obscure life force. I've never heard a convincing argument for that at all once in my life. But one could see why people would conveniently adopt that. Now, the one thing I want to make clear is when you ascribe to Christianity, specifically Catholicism, when you come to natural law, there's a different kind of freedom that needs to be understood. Right. And it's a difference between the autonomous self-direction of being able to do whatever the heck you want all the time. Look, God gave us that freedom no matter what. He wanted us to be free. So it's not like you lose that upon becoming a Christian. But then there are also certain things, and those certain things really are just aligning with God's will. Certain things that are really good for you, that grant you a different kind of freedom. And that's the freedom for excellence, the freedom for flourishing. God is the center of oughtness. He is a center. His will is really just commandments to do what is ultimately really good for you. So by aligning yourself with God's will, by becoming obedient with what God wants, you achieve a whole newer and higher level of freedom, which is the freedom to flourish, to be excellent, to live in relation and communion with God. Now, does that mean you have to desire certain things and want certain things and act in certain ways? Yes, but it's not a restriction of freedom. It's an access to an even higher level of freedom. And I think that's just something that people need to understand, because they so often think of Christianity or Catholicism about a set of arbitrary rules. It's not. Morality is a blueprint for human flourishing and coming into communion with God. It's something that, when properly understood, we should not only feel we have to do, but should actually want to do. And that's what I have to say about that.
Wow. So really, this freedom of excellence, this whatever you're going to be getting from that freedom, it's probably what people are trying to do when they go to yoga, right? And they're not going to fully get. Like, this is that they want to commune with the universe and whatever. And I can say this because I used to do yoga. I mean, like, 2 hours a day.
Still trying to get the demons out, Pete.
I got baptized recently. All my sins are washed away. 33 years of sin gone in a moment.
I remember seeing, like, it was either an Onion or a Babylon Bee article where it's like, man hits yoga pose and is immediately, invaded by a throng of demons. Yeah.
Like, yoga's only bad as if it supplants your Christianity.
That's right. There's nothing wrong with the practice of flexibility, right?
Mobile.
But there is something wrong with worshiping false idols,
right?
Or coming out of alignment or communion with God.
Yeah, but there is, that this idea. I think the searching that people go through with, say yoga, meditation, Buddhism, whatever. It is trying to find that freedom for excellence that you can find in Christianity or Catholicism.
Yeah. Pete, I wanted you to chime in here because I'm about to go on another enormous rant, and I want to...
Please, quick.
Stop him.
Stop. No, okay, so hold on, Pete. Maybe you can answer this. So we have this idea that the life force, I mean, this goes back to St. Augustine at least, so it's nothing new. Mm-hmm. We can say that the issues of this age are back to moral relativism, which seems to have come and gone throughout the years, right? I mean, this is nothing new. So why does it feel so bad today? Is it just because we're alive in this time?
I think where it feels so bad now is I think we're taking it to the moral extreme and seeing really, I guess, how much we can get away with nowadays. With moral relativism, there are no moral or objective truths, is we're so trying to find morality in ourselves by essentially giving everyone what they want, right? We talked about, that search for excellence, so to speak. We want to be so excellent as a human race by, giving everyone what they want and, making amends for past ills, so to speak, by, paying reparations to Native Americans, for example, or, the idea of white privilege, Whitey being in power for so long that now it's his time to have this fall from grace. And I think that what I said, we're trying to get away with so much now in the absence of God that we've so run away from him piecemeal, and just because, like Pat said, is people see that as such a restrictive set of rules to live by that they don't want to live that way anymore.
Yeah, and a lot of this, comes down to the abandonment of the religious position, which has led to the rise of postmodernism, which is a term you hear thrown around a lot, but I think very few people are clear on what that actually is. And it is hard to nail it down because it is kind of a jumble of different philosophies, but I think you can kind of essentially and fairly describe it as a tearing down of any sense of objective truth or reality, and replacing it with a series of linguistic power grabs and narratives and things of that sort. Now, the problem with that is they will say that everything is essentially a social construct, but they won't apply that concept to their own social construct of postmodernism. Right? Like somehow that ekes through as the objective truth. And you'll have a few, very minority of postmodernists, perhaps in the literature and the philosophy journals, that will admit to this absurdity and kind of assume agnosticism. But we can talk about the problems of agnosticism previously. Most postmodernists are actually acting like they have the objective truth that they're denying, which is a self-refuting. The philosophy, folks, I want to be very clear, really is this stupid. It really is this absurd. It really is this easy to refute. It's not something that people should be taking seriously. But the fact that this has seeped and steeped in academia for so long, it has provided those philosophical foundations for which people can launch into any number of absurdities that they so choose, which is, again, this comes back to the idea of identifying as whatever the heck you want. Again, pineapple pizza is my personal favorite. Maybe add a little ham on there, things of that sort.
The perfect balance.
Because again, but people don't realize that this stuff didn't just come out of nowhere, right? There's been a sort of pernicious philosophy and ideology that has been percolating in academia for a political time since people started to abandon the religious position or natural law theory or things like this, that has trickled down onto the popular and political level. So they're seeing the kind of blossoming or the budding or the top level of things without understanding where it really comes from, which is this utterly asinine and futile philosophy of postmodernism, which makes absolutely no sense whatever. It's repugnant to common sense. There's no way to justify it on its own grounds, but has led to the quagmire of moral relativism, of identity politics, of this intersectionality, all of this trash that we now see. And I'm sorry for the polemic language, but it really is quite alarming and frightening what's going on. And I feel that it does very much need to be battled against. I don't believe that people who promote this are bad people or evil people, but I do believe they have bought into a bad and evil philosophy and ideology. They have been duped fundamentally. It doesn't make sense. Nobody should subscribe to it. We need to try and get back those right philosophical foundations, the religious position, because if you're going to promote that tolerance is right, you need some type of objective truth to say that tolerance is right. Mm-hmm. But then where do you ground morality? You can't ground it on a naturalistic, atheistic worldview. It isn't objective then. It's at best a subjective phenomenon, some type of invention of the human mind. We don't have any obligation to obey a delusion or anything like that. Give me a break. If morality is going to be real, if we're going to have any type of moral obligation, there must be some type of moral law giver. But as soon as you affirm that from God and you start to investigate into that, you realize, oh, yeah, God actually designed things to be a certain way. There is a natural law. There is a natural order, the way things are supposed to be. There are privations and perversions and distortions that are out of line with God's will, God's intention. And I have an obligation to try and correct those in my own life and to talk about these perversions and distortions and help other people come to know the truth as well. So there's so much to unpack with all this, but hopefully I've given some sort of idea of, I think, where it starts to come from.
Pete, when you had said I think it was the white man's fall from grace. It was time for the white man's fall from grace. It made me realize that it makes it sound like a very vengeful age too. Like these people are
incredibly vengeful.
Yes, and they're trying to force love on the other, but through hateful means.
Right.
We are not allowed to love one another as Christians. We have to tolerate and bow down to others regardless of our own moral leanings.
And I think there's something to be said. Like when we talk of Christian love, agape, we're talking about willing the good of the other. It doesn't mean like being cuddly with somebody all the time, like I am with my wife right now. Cuddly affection, eros or storge or however you pronounce. I'm not very good with the original terms. But affection, romantic love, friendship, companionship, like these are not all Christian love is willing the good of the other, doing what you believe is in the best interest for other people because you want what is their best interest. So this doesn't just mean that you're just going to accept any nonsense that people are going to pile on your plate. If I know that somebody is doing something deeply hurtful to themselves, say they're doing certain drugs or they're addicted to certain behaviors like pornography or something like that, for me to love them might involve some tough love, so to speak, some harsh loves of being very direct with this person, maybe doing a lot of saying things that offend this person, that go against what this person wants, of quarreling with this person. But I love this person. I want what is best for them. And anybody who succumbs to these ideologies, again, very clear, I don't think that they're bad people. I think that they are acting out of position of what they think is right. I do think they've been duped. I want to have that discussion. I want to help because I think that this is a severe perversion. It is pulling us out of alignment of what is actually really and truly good for us as human beings, of what is this blueprint for human flourishing. So again, I tend to be polemic. I tend to be, somewhat exacting in my terms, but I don't want to make it seem like I'm indifferent or uncaring. I really do care about anybody on any part of the spectrum. But when you care about it, when you love in the Christian sense, it doesn't just mean that you're just going to idly go along with anything that people say.
And I think we're so quick, like Christine said, that vengefulness, we're so quick to write off what could be good philosophy or, even our religious talkings here. People are so quick to be vengeful towards what they see as contradictory, or Pat even said, we can't be offended nowadays. They're so quick to write that off with ad hominem attacks. Oh, that's racist, or that's hate speech, God forbid, or something to that effect, therefore nullifying your entire argument from the very get-go. And I think that's a horrible way to live. And Pat talked about, you can't pull morality out of nothing. I think we're in an age where people are trying to pull morality out of the states, and out of the state, so to speak. And we're seeing, such a vitriolic political air nowadays, where people are literally attacking themselves and others over their own political ideologies. And me and Pat just had a fantastic conversation, and you'll see that on his page indeed. Too, about, ironically, whether Jesus was a socialist. And we talked about, people are trying so hard to back their religion into their politics.
Other way around.
Or they're the other way around, or backing their politics into their religion and forming their religion around politics. Whereas instead of standing on the firm ground of religion and then basing your political beliefs around that.
Well, I do want to come back to the original point of this episode of, are we in a wicked age? I'm kind of setting the groundwork to see like how we got here, I think is important. But then I think there's some things we can really look at and start to take an accounting of and measurement of and say, okay, if we have an objective morality, if we have natural law to tell us like these things are really good for us, these things really aren't, then we can see that there's a lot of stuff going on today that is objectively wrong, even if a lot of people don't think it is. We come back to that topic of abortion, right? Objectively wrong, right? To snuff out human life and the potential for human life. And you don't just have to use natural law or God to show that abortion is wrong. You can use a lot of secular or, like Kantian style ethics or whatever to show that abortion is wrong. Like it's hard to actually put abortion through virtually any ethical system.
Right.
But it's certainly not something that they can put through an objective morality grounded in God or natural law. So, we have this absolute holocaust of the unborn going on. We have, we have this descent into people acting as if that they themselves are God, that they can determine who or
Kermit
what.
Gosnell comes to mind.
Yeah, who or what they are or what they can do. The curbing of human freedoms on many different degrees. And I think it's easy to kind of lose sight of these things because we do live in great material comfort, right? So when we say like times are good, we have to be like, well, what do you mean by good? If you think that the final end of human beings is just to have a comfy couch and 1,015 television channels, sure. All right, great. We live in a pretty good time. But if you think that there's some higher objective meaning and value to human life, then we have to get out of this infantile view that just because things have progressed materially or whatever, that we don't live in a time that is just suffused with moral evil. We absolutely do. And now I'm not saying that we should write off material means. I think that they are important, that people need to it's hard to live a good, devout, spiritual life and commit with God and do good things in the world if you're just constantly, battling against starving to death. Don't get me wrong. But if we mix our priorities up and all we're looking for is just to kind of be happy cows here on earth, provided for and fattened with butter and steak. That'd be cannibalism if you're a cow. That'd be weird.
More relativism. It's okay.
Well, yeah. What is cannibalism? Right? It's funny. We have some weird people like Richard Dawkins, like trying to say like we should get the taboo of cannibalism. Give me a break. This is the age we're living in, folks. It's a wicked age. So I think one is just being very clear that, just because we've progressed in certain materialistic aspects, which again, like in the right context, good, but it hasn't always been in the right context.
But by all rights, the freeing of our minds, we don't have to constantly battle against the elements, where to find food, how to keep ourselves warm through a snowy night, because those travails are taken from us now because of our material comforts. We should be able to direct our minds towards something really good. We should be more moral than ever.
Well, this is what Pete and I were just talking about, and it goes to substantiate why God permits the existence of suffering. Because sometimes, when people are fattened, so to speak, on the comforts of life, who needs God?
Right.
That's what the Beatitudes. I mean, you hear, "Blessed are the meek."
Yeah.
And all these things. It doesn't mean that the comfortable ones, the privileged ones, will be the most blessed overall.
But guess what? Suffering's coming. It's on its way. It doesn't matter how comfortable you are financially or anything, like
politically or spiritually.
It's coming, physically, whatever. It's inevitable. So you can either prepare for it now, or you can be, blindsided by it later. But let's go through a few more unpopular Catholic teachings because we already hit, abortion. But just because something is unpopular doesn't mean that it's wrong or right. Right? We have to evaluate the arguments by themselves. Let's talk about the Catholic teaching on sex, because we want to talk about a wicked age. We might as well go right in on that and contraception. I have become a huge fan of Humanae Vitae and the prophetic power that was issued in that encyclical. Not only did everything the Pope predicted come true from the kind of desanctification of the sexual act and the use of contraceptive, but it came through and came true on a level that far exceeded his own predictions. Now, everybody laughed at the time when this came out. Oh, this is hyperbole. This will never happen. my God, like, well, let's just go point by point here, right? So the Catholic position, of course, is that the sexual act should be both unitive and procreative. And to frustrate any of those ends, this again ties into natural law, to frustrate the openness to life is to desanctify and lose a great deal of meaning in the sexual act. It is immoral to do that because it is, of course, frustrating what the purpose of that act is, to be unitive and both procreative. Now, if you nix the procreative aspect of the openness to life in the sexual act, well, then you kind of lose the whole meaning of sex and especially marriage to begin with. So, I mean, that opens a million doors right there, which have certainly been walked right through ever since. But then, you have exactly what the Pope predicted, right? An explosion in single motherhood, fatherlessness in children, people dependent on the state because there is no solid family unit, the objectification of women. So this is the great irony, right? This is the same type of political party that agitated for this sexual revolution is now the political party that has championed the hashtag Me Too movement because of the abuse and objectification of women in this sexual thing. And, they made fun of the Pope at the time when he said, like, look, this is making a moral mistake. This is going to pervert the sexual act. People are going to start using it in perverse ways. And a lot of nasty things are going to come about it. Not only did all of those nasty things come about, but so much more than he even predicted. People are so sexually confused these days and so not finding the fulfillment in the sexual act that was promised by these so-called revolutionaries. It's a joke. And look, we all fell into this in some regard. I'm not a saint in any of this. I suffered through this like anybody else. It led to tons of confusion and angst, and certainly stories that would probably be inappropriate for any of us to share on a podcast. But like, there's a wonderful book, like Why Humanae Vitae is Still Right. And people should seriously read that and consider that, because it not only, I think, gives us hard empirical substantiation of what was cited in that encyclical, but of just how important the natural law is, and to maintain these Catholic teaching and that they're there for a reason. They make sense. These are not arbitrary rules. And if you start to break away from one, who knows what the consequences will be. Certain ones were predicted by the Pope, and lo and behold, what actually happened was far worse than what was even initially announced.
Right. And to get back to abortion for just a second, and then I can touch on sex too.
What's another unpopular Catholic teaching we can get?
But with abortion especially, you've seen it become such a battle of semantics. It's, I'm not pro-abortion, I'm pro-choice, and all that other utter nonsense. And, Pat talked about, Humanae Vitae and sex. We've essentially turned the act of sex into a handshake now. It's, you gotta test drive the goods before you really take it for a ride, so to speak. And, and I've seen so many things, just passing in the grocery store, Cosmo magazine, and all the other women's magazines, ignite all your fantasies and things like that. And, how 50 Shades of Grey has saved my marriage, so to speak. And it's just so pervasive nowadays. And Pat said, we so cheapen the act of sex that no one gets any gratification out of it anymore.
And going back to the abortion thing, I was like, I'm channeling the Mother Angelica right now. Like, she got it right. Like, please, everybody, just pay some attention. Listen to sweet old Mother Angelica. Like, that woman actually knew what she was talking about. People mocked her at the time, but again, truth is truth. If you're going to, say that abortion is okay, you have to realize that you're willing to discriminate against human life based either on size, level of development, environment, or dependency. And so we must be willing to apply this equally across the board. Like, if I put Pete on Mars where he's not self-sufficient, should I be able to tear his legs and arms off from his torso and put him in a blender? Probably most people would say not, right? If Pete were not gigantic as a person, but extremely tiny? Should I just be able to snuff them out of existence with my heel? Absolutely not. So any of the arguments for why you should be able to kill a fetus or a baby in the womb, or just, it's important to understand on a moral framework, are entirely arbitrary. Entirely arbitrary. There is no good moral argument for abortion. Don't give me this pro-choice nonsense. You had many choices leading up to it. You have many choices of what you want to do once you have the baby. There's no choice restriction of choices here. All we're saying is either murder is wrong or murder's not wrong, and you can arbitrarily discriminate on who you decide that is either worthy of being murdered or not.
You said earlier about being duped, and I can say that I was extremely duped in the past because I was hugely violently a pro-choice feminist. I was a socialist. I was a democratic socialist. Like, I was the exact opposite on the spectrum that I could possibly get at this point. And I would say that when I was pro-choice, I didn't even know. I just figured, like, this was a clump of cells. So whatever they're selling, what the part of the ideology of being pro-choice, which is interesting to me that you kind of touched on this a second ago, Pete, I think, it's not pro-life or pro-choice or anti-abortion. It's pro-death. If pro-life is one side,
let's
the
call
opposite,
it what it is.
Yeah, the opposite is pro-death. But when I was pro-choice, pro-death, I didn't even realize that was the case in my head, because you would see, like, the size, when you went into a clinic or whatever, it would, have the size of a fetus, and at 8 weeks, it's the size of a pencil eraser or the tip of a pen. Like, oh, that can't possibly be a real life. That's just a clump of cells. Mm-hmm. So I think it's whoever, there's a good chance that they've all just been duped. They don't even know.
Yeah, they definitely have. And it's like, it's not that philosophically difficult, right? If it has human parents, well, then it's human. And if it's growing, it's alive. So why are we killing this thing?
No, I would say, but being in that circle years ago, I would say that is not even the human parentage. That doesn't even come up. Like, that, it's just, it is not even a thing. It's just, this is the thing, and a little invasion in your life.
Yeah, they make it seem it's a parasite and an imposition
it's a woman's
on your
health
freedom.
issue.
Look, it is a very pernicious and clever ideology, because they make it seem like somebody's trying to impose your freedom. They're trying to take away your rights, that there's some type of parasite feeding inside of you. But you don't realize that you're really just snuffing out the potential of a beautiful, infinitely precious human being's life, right? That's what you're doing. And if it is wrong to end anybody's potential at life at any stage, then it is wrong to end anybody's potential at life at any stage. We could use Kantian ethics and say, is abortion universalizable? Would you like to have been aborted when you were 2 weeks old?
No.
Of course not. Nobody would, right? So if something isn't universalizable, and this is Kant, right? This is not a great religious moral philosophy. That's why I like to try to use these. Obviously, natural law and Catholic philosophy rebels against abortion, but we can use other systems of ethics as well, like Kant. And again, the good idea of Kant was, for something to be moral, it should be universalizable, right? So obviously, lying wouldn't be moral, because if everybody lied, nobody would trust anybody. It would just be so counterproductive; it'd be absurd. It would lead to incoherency. Well, same thing with abortion. If everybody just started getting abortions, right? It obviously is not a universalizable principle. Therefore, it cannot be said that it is any way morally justified or morally good. Whereas something like loving your neighbor or willing the good of the other obviously would be. So again, the moral argument for abortion is not a good moral argument. It's not, but it is a clever perversion of trying to get people to think that they are being attacked or their rights infringed upon, or that a whole bunch of people in power don't want women to have control over their own bodies. And I get it. I get why people buy into that, but you got to snap out of it. You just got to come to terms with reality that this is not what's going on. The people who are pro-life are saying a very simple thing. Humans are infinitely precious and worth preserving. There's no point in discriminating of if murder is wrong, then you don't just get to arbitrarily decide when, at what stage of development, based again on size, level of development, where they happen to be located, or the amount of dependency that person has in their life, that you can just arbitrarily stomp them or cut them or mutilate them out of existence. It's either wrong or it's not wrong. And we all have to deal with the fact that certain things have moral priority. I am inconvenienced by the fact that I can't just murder everybody in front of me at line at the grocery store. This is a great inconvenience to me. But but like give me a break. I'm sorry. But life is full of inconveniences. But doing the morally right thing is better for you, is more worthwhile than just trying to make your life more convenient. So I think that's worth being said.
I was quickly looking up a statistic. Since 1980, worldwide, 1.5 billion abortions. So that is far more than any war put together, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Over the many ages. Let's just bring this back real quick. As we talk about the wickedness of this age, I don't want to end this on a sour.
Can I just say one more thing? And I want to make this very, very, very clear. If somebody has had an abortion or any of this, I never want to say that I think that person is a bad person. I think that there is, again, a dangerous, pernicious, sick, perverted, demonic ideology that is great at duping people. That's it. It is the ideology that I am against. I totally get why people have bought into the pro-choice movement. I think that they, again, think that they are agitating for something that they think is good and right. I think they, again, are just have a misunderstanding of the moral facts.
Yeah, and actually, let's talk about that for just a little bit more. God is merciful. If you have had an abortion, he will give you forgiveness. And there's also a great Catholic resource called Project Rachel to help in the healing process if that's where you are at. That's a nice note. Thank you for saying that, Pat. But also let's look forward. I don't want this to end on a sour note. We talk about how wicked we all are at this point collectively. Where do we go from here? What can we do? What hope do we have?
Well, I think you did something good. I mean, like we are all wicked, right? We all suffer the noetic effects of sin. We're all bent over by sin, and that's the great contribution of humanity. Is like we all need help, right? None of us can do this by ourselves. We couldn't before. We can't even now. We need God's grace. We need to ask God for help and be receptive to His help. So, I mean, that's the first step. I mean, any continued move away from God, away from religion, will only increase the amount of corruption and perversion in society. I am hesitantly optimistic that I think our culture is actually making a return to the religious in some respects. I'm not ready to make any predictions now, but if like 5 years ago, I wasn't religious then, but if I was religious 5 years ago, I probably would have been quite pessimistic. But I don't know. I think there's an opportunity here that people are now more receptive to evangelization and hearing the news because they're seeing these things that they know are wrong, right? They like know like on some level this is wrong, and it seems like, hold on a minute. Is the Catholic Church the only people making sense these days? Right. It's like, and people have said that to me. Like people that are not Catholics or Christian have said that to me. It's like, like I never thought I'd say this, but it's like I find myself really agreeing with a lot of the things the Catholic Church are saying these days. It's like, and I had a conversation with this. A friend is like, that's what got me, man. It's like it was the Catholic philosophy and doctrine and teachings that just were consistent all the way through and gave me the answers that I were looking for. So I think there's an opportunity. Pete, you're curious to get your thoughts on what your outlooks are.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to look around and try to find answers nowadays and what is true. I mean, when everything else is telling you that nothing is true, really. I guess for me, coming back around to the faith has answered a lot of the questions that I had, like you brought up, what is this life for? Pat mentioned in our earlier talkings that I kind of refound the faith through a tragic death of my brother in the family. And that searching for meaning, I looked in everything else. I looked to, can the state provide it for me, which was, about an hour of me searching, found that not to be so true. I looked and I found it through, reading apologetics and things like that. And I think that, they say it at every World Youth Day, if we all band together and we're of this faith, we can change a generation. We can set the world on fire, so to speak. And I think part of that is, we all came around, and we hope others can come around too.
Let's hope. Well, any lastlies?
Yes. Do we have another 20 minutes?
Well, first off, let's give you 20 seconds.
Yeah, he's taken up a lot of.
This might be the last time for a long time that you invite me on the Catholic Mama. I mean, you haven't killed my, Hollywood career in one.
You're just gonna have to build it back up on your own.
Yeah, that's all right. I've found work elsewhere. Let's say I'm not over much concerned about my movie career or anything like that. I think this is all really important stuff. I think it's important for people to study deeply the Catholic teaching and philosophy, and to see that it does make sense, and this is right, and this is true, and the loss of natural law in culture and society has just led to all of these very sad state of affairs, these very deep confusions that our culture now seems to be in, and this enormous divide between people, again, that did not exist before for a very long time. Again, people always had differences, but they were much more minor than they are now. We can see that the differences now are just so fundamental, and it seems like they might even be entirely irreconcilable on some respects. And I think we could draw that to any number of particular events, but I see it as that loss of the religious kind of, infusion throughout the culture that kept the fabric together, where people could have various differences but still agree on very basic moral principles and work things out and communicate and dialogue in a much more amicable and productive way. I don't know how to restore it, aside from saying, like, you got to get out there, you got to promote, you got to evangelize, you got to lead by example, you got to give arguments, and you got to not be shy. You have to go on iTunes, you have to hit subscribe, leave a 5-star review on the Catholic Mama, and like a 2-paragraph review so people find this show and we can restore America. Was that the right answer, Christine? I forgot.
I guess so.
Awesome plug.
Yeah. Well, actually, real quick. So we were listening to the Patrick Hoffman show on the way out here on our drive, and I think it was in that one we were talking about some of the founding fathers, right? Was that one of the episodes we were listening to? And Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin. I know Pat makes fun of me because I said I always pronounce it Benjamin. It's Benjamin. Benjamin Franklin. It sounds so weird to me. He was one of the least religious of the founding fathers, yet even still they were having a hard time passing things or agreeing on things. He'd say, stop. Let's stop. Let's go to church and pray. That ain't happening now, but it could. It could. Pete, do you have any lastlies before we sign off?
No, I'm good. I think we wrapped it up pretty well.
I think so. So I do want to say, the three of us sitting here, we're millennials. The millennial generation is not a lost generation. And we've talked to many seminarians who are just starting out, who are also millennials. We're part of, back home, we're part of a Catholic youth group for 20s and 30 somethings, and they're very passionate and driven and involved. There is hope with all of this, but it is, you have to evangelize. You can't be shy. And since starting this, I think, Pat and I may be, or at least I feel like I'm in a unique position because I wasn't raised as a Catholic. I was raised, quite opposite of that. So, I'm excited. And people don't know, they may know me as an atheist. So suddenly when I turn around and I'm super Catholic, I'm not sure it's unexpected that I became Catholic, but not, I was pretty energized about evangelizing whatever my religion at the time happened to be, which is usually some other kind of politics or anti-religion, I guess. But you just have to be chatty about all this. And don't be shy, like you said, Pat. There's hope. Right. Let's start with that. There's hope. Isn't that beautiful? All right. Oh, go ahead.
I mean, hope is a Christian virtue. Of course, there is hope, but there should also be a reserved. Optimism isn't always merited. Hope, yes, right. We can trust in God's providence that things are going to, of course, work according to His plan. But that doesn't mean that tomorrow is going to be all rainbows and unicorns, and it doesn't mean that we don't have work to do either. Get out there, folks. Profess and proclaim the good news. Evangelize. Do the work, no matter how unpopular it is. Like, look, if I can sit here and kill my Hollywood career, you can kill yours. Come on, let's go.
Yeah, I've actually had quite a few people message me saying, I don't know how to talk about God. And they're cradle Catholics. I don't know how to do it because they're nervous. They don't know what people are going to think of them. You know what? Who cares? I mean, yeah, you should care what people think, so that you don't, run around topless and sleep with everybody under the sun. You should care about that. But when it comes to talking about God, you should not be shy and you should not care.
Well, let me just finish with this. As somebody
one last blurb.
As somebody who has a sizable platform of my own, I can tell you that there is an enormous silent majority out there that wants to hear this, that is receptive to this and needs you to preach it and proclaim it. They're not the people that are always the most vocal and agitated on social media, right? This is the more sane crowd, and they're confused, they're curious, they're wanting to hear this. So you gotta ignore the people who are just going to be out there to kind of to always rebel or to be just absolutely anti-religious no matter what. Those are always going to exist, but realize that there is a great silent majority that wants to hear about the stuff, that needs the stuff and is looking for it. So you can be that voice. Get out there, share stuff like this podcast episode, do the good work, evangelize.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Pete. As is said in the end of most masses, go forth and spread the good word. So don't be shy about that. And if you are a little nervous and shy about spreading your faith because you're afraid that people are going to ask you questions that you don't know the answers to, don't forget to download How to Talk to Your Kids About God. It's a free ebook on thecatholicmama.com. I'll link it in the show notes. It has 7 of the most common and kind of difficult questions that actually stemmed from my son, who is old enough to remember when we weren't religious, and asked sometimes, why do we go to church now and we didn't before? Why do we pray now and we didn't before? And I had to learn the answers to a lot of these really probing good questions because kids are natural philosophers. So head over there, pick that up, share the podcast, write a review, hit subscribe. That'd be wonderful. Thank you so much on this extra long episode, an extra special episode of The Catholic Mama. See you next time. Don't forget to head over to thecatholicmama.com to get your free copy of How to Talk to Your Kids About God. This handy little ebook will teach you how to broach the topic of God with your children, or how to respond to your kids when they want to talk about God, as well as give you answers to 7 of the trickiest questions about the faith that Christian parents face. You'll love the easy to understand grown-up answers, the pared down but not talked down answers you can share with your kids, plus recommended resources if you'd like to deepen your understanding of the topic. Get yours free at thecatholicmama.com.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.